Hi everybody, we're back this week with more summer reading. And this week's theme is magical creatures. Well, I decided I was going to do mythical monsters. And I found this cool book. And I said, oh yeah, this is cool. We got to show the kids this. Some of these monsters I've never even heard of, but these are supposed to be famous monsters. Now the first one I want to talk about, or show you, you know this one. Every little kid knows this one. I got to get to him. The Boogeyman. Okay, look at him. He's pretty cool looking, isn't he? It says his eyes are large, dark, and bulbous. The boogeyman's eyes are adapted to coping with the low light levels found under the bed and inside bedroom cupboards. Has a nose wide and fat, ideal for sniffing out young victims. I smell children. Has long, sharp, pointed fingernails so it can rip through bedclothes, right down to the petrified kids sleeping in the bed. And this thing tells you where in the world this mythical monster is supposed to have come from. They say the boogeyman is found mainly in North America. That's us. Where many towns and districts have their own legends about this horrible being. Boogeyman tales are also told in the UK, especially in Scotland, where stories of bogies abound. I never remember my parents telling me about a boogeyman, but we've all heard of boogeymen. Thought this one was cool too, and I know somebody, I can't remember who it is, that has a stuffed one of these. This is a chupacabra. And some people say this critter is real. Look at him. Wowzers. Eyewitness accounts are muddled. Estimates of the creature's height in the standing position vary from 3 feet 3 inches to 6 feet 6 inches. Supposedly it has wings, bat-like wings, with a span of up to 13 feet. Some witnesses say the beast has fair gray or blue skin. Others say that it has scales or fur. Look at its fangs. Wowzers. Pretty cool. Leviathan. You ever hear of this thing? Looks like a giant fish. It's pretty monstery looking. And it's found in all the seas. Leviathan has his origins in early Hebrew writings from the Middle East, dating back to about 3,000 years. Back, the Hebrews occupied Turkey, Syria, Jordan, Israel, Iraq, and Iran, but the monster has the run of all the world's oceans. Wow. It says he dominates the watery wastes of the world and has power over all the creatures in the ocean. Leviathan. He's just creepy looking. Yikes. And one more before we get to reading. Ever hear of the Oni? The Oni is supposed to be of Japanese origin. It says, whistling gaily as it works, this ghastly creature delights in tormenting the people of Japan, avoiding detection by flitting invisibly through the air or taking human form. Once a Shinto god, it became an evil spirit after Buddhism spread into Japan from China in the 6th century. In earthly guise, it causes disasters, famine, and disease, while its demonic form steals sinners' souls. Many Onis have green or red skin. They suffer continual hunger and often have enormous bellies. Hunting down sinners, they take them in a fiery chariot to hell. Woo! It says, living in the mortal world are found almost exclusively in Japan, although they are thought to have originated in China. Other Onis known as Gaki inhabit the spirit world, or Jigoku, hell underground. Look at this guy. 3 eyes, 3 horns, fangs, pants. What? In Chinese myth, a Kimon gate separates demons from the earth. And as this faces the tiger of the zodiac, the Oni usually wears tiger skin pants. Okie dokie. Well, there's lots of mythical monsters we know, and I thought you might enjoy, as much as we can get done, of Patrick Ness's A Monster Calls. The mythical monsters, I took it out of the library a while ago and read the whole thing. It might be fun for you to check it out when summer reading, when the library opens again. I think you'll find it pretty fascinating. This book is called A Monster Calls, and it does involve a very mythical and strange monster. I love the artwork in it. I will try to show it to you as well. It's all in black and white, no color, but it's impressive. Monster Calls, a novel by Patrick Ness. You're only young once, they say, but doesn't it go on for a long time? More years than you can bear. A quote from another writer. Yeah, when you're young, you want to be older. When you get older, you think you might want to be young again. Look at the monster. Just cool looking. I hope you can see it. The monster showed up just after midnight, as they do. Connor was awake when it came. He'd had a nightmare. Well, not a nightmare. The nightmare. The one he'd been having a lot lately. The one with the darkness and the wind and the screaming. The one with the hands slipping from his grasp, no matter how hard he tried to hold on. The one that always ended with, "Go away," Connor whispered into the darkness of his bedroom, trying to push the nightmare back, not let it follow him into the world of waking. Go away now. He glanced over at the clock his mom had put on his bedside table. 12:07. 7 minutes past midnight, which was late for a school night, late for a Sunday, certainly. He told no one about the nightmare. Not his mom, obviously, but no one else either. Not his dad in their fortnightly or so phone call, definitely not his grandma, and no one at school. Absolutely not. What happened in the nightmare was something no one else ever needed to know. Connor blinked groggily at his room, and then he frowned. There was something he was missing. He sat up in his bed, waking a bit more. The nightmare was slipping from him, but there was something he couldn't put his finger on. Something different, something. He listened, straining against the silence. But all he could hear was the quiet house around him, the occasional tick from the empty downstairs, or a rustle of bedding from his mom's room next door. Nothing. And then something. Something, he realized, was the thing that had woken him. Someone was calling his name. Connor. He felt a rush of panic, his guts twisting. Had it followed him? Had it somehow stepped out of the nightmare and... Don't be stupid, he told himself. You're too old for monsters. And he was. He'd turned 13 just last month. Monsters were for babies. Monsters were for bedwetters. Monsters were for Connor. There it was again. Connor swallowed. It had been an unusually warm October, and his window was still open. Maybe the curtains shushing each other in the small breeze could have sounded like, "Connor." All right, it wasn't the wind. It was definitely a voice, but not one he recognized. It wasn't his mother's, that's for sure. It wasn't a woman's voice at all. And he wondered for a crazy moment if his dad had somehow made a surprise trip from America and arrived too late to phone and, "Connor." No, not his dad. This voice had a quality to it, a monstrous quality, wild and untamed. Then he heard a heavy creak of wood outside, as if something gigantic was stepping across a timber floor. He didn't want to go and look, but at the same time, a part of him wanted to look more than anything. Wide awake now, he pushed back the covers, got out of bed, and went over to the window. In the pale half-light of the moon, he could clearly see the church tower up on the small hill behind his house, the one with the train tracks curving beside it, two hard steel lines glowing dully in the night. The moon shone, too, on the graveyard attached to the church, filled with tombstones you could hardly read anymore. Connor could also see the great yew tree that rose from the center of the graveyard, a tree so ancient it almost seemed to be made of the same stone as the church. He only knew it was a yew because his mother had told him, first when he was little to make sure he didn't eat the berries, which were poisonous, and again this past year when she'd started staring out of their kitchen window with a funny look on her face and saying, "That's a yew tree, you know." And then he heard his name again, Connor, like it was being whispered in both his ears. "What?" Connor said, his heart thumping, suddenly impatient for whatever was going to happen. A cloud moved in front of the moon, covering the whole landscape in darkness, and a whoosh of wind rushed down the hill and into his room, billowing the curtains. He heard the creaking and cracking of wood again, groaning like a living thing, like the hungry stomach of the world growling for a meal. And then the cloud passed, and the moon shone again on the yew tree, which now stood firmly in the middle of his backyard. And here was the monster. As Connor watched, the uppermost branches of the tree gathered themselves into a great and terrible face, shimmering into a mouth and nose and even eyes, peering back at him. Other branches twisted around one another, always creaking, always groaning, until they formed two long arms and a second leg to set down beside the main trunk. The rest of the tree gathered itself into a spine and then a torso, the thin, needle-like leaves weaving together to make a green, furry skin that moved and breathed as if there were muscles and lungs underneath. Already taller than Connor's window, the monster grew wider as it brought itself together, filling out to a powerful shape, one that looked somehow strong, somehow mighty. It stared at Connor the whole time, and he could hear the loud, windy breathing from its mouth. It set its giant hands on either side of his window, lowering its head until its huge eyes filled the frame. Holding Connor with its glare, Connor's house gave a little moan under its weight. This is an awesome picture. See the tree? And it looks like a thing. I love that picture. He's just outside the window. And then the monster spoke. "Connor O'Malley," it said, a huge gust of warm, compost-smelling breath rushing through Connor's window, blowing his hair back. Its voice rumbled low and loud, with a vibration so deep Connor could feel it in his chest. "I've come to get you, Connor O'Malley," the monster said, pushing against the house, shaking the pictures off Connor's wall, sending books and electronic gadgets and an old stuffed toy Ronno tumbling to the floor. A monster, Connor thought. A real, honest-to-goodness monster. in real waking life. Not in a dream, but here, at his window. Come to get him. But Connor didn't run. In fact, he found he wasn't even frightened. All he could feel, all he had felt since the monster revealed itself, was a growing disappointment. Because this wasn't the monster he was expecting. So come and get me then, he said. A strange quiet fell. What did you say? The monster asked. Connor crossed his arms. I said, come and get me then. The monster paused for a moment, and then with a roar, it pounded 2 fists against the house. Connor's ceiling buckled under the blows, and huge cracks appeared in the walls. Wind filled the room, and air thundering with the monster's angry bellows. Shout all you want, Connor shrugged, barely raising his voice. I've seen worse. The monster roared even louder and smashed an arm through Connor's window, shattering glass and wood and brick. A huge, twisted, branch-wound hand grabbed Connor around the middle and lifted him off the floor. It swung him out of his room into the night, high above his backyard, holding him up against the circle of the moon, its fingers clenching so hard against Connor's ribs he could barely breathe. Connor could see raggedy teeth made of hard, knotted wood in the monster's open mouth, and he felt warm breath rushing up toward him. And then the monster paused again. You really aren't afraid, are you? No, Connor said, not of you anyway. The monster narrowed its eyes. You will be, it said, before the end. The last thing Connor remembered was the monster's mouth roaring open to eat him alive. Next chapter, breakfast. Mum, Connor asked, stepping into the kitchen. He knew she wouldn't be in there. He couldn't hear the kettle boiling, which she always did first thing, but he found himself asking for her a lot lately when he entered rooms in the house. He didn't want to startle her, just in case she'd fallen asleep somewhere she hadn't planned to. But she wasn't in the kitchen, which meant she was probably still up in her bed. Which meant Connor would have to make his own breakfast, something he'd grown used to doing. Fine, good, in fact, especially this morning. He walked quickly to the trash and stuffed the plastic bag he was carrying down near the bottom, covering it up with other rubbish so it wouldn't be obvious. There, he said to no one, and stood breathing for a second. Then he nodded to himself and said, breakfast. Some bread in the toaster, some cereal in a bowl, some juice in a glass, and he was ready to go, sitting down at the little table in the kitchen to eat. His mom had her own bread and cereal, which she bought at a health food shop in town, and which Connor thankfully didn't have to share. It tasted as unhappy as it looked. He looked up at the clock. 25 minutes before he had to leave. He was already in his school uniform, his rucksack packed for the day, and waiting by the front door. All things he'd done for himself. He sat with his back to the kitchen window, the one over the sink that looked out onto their small backyard, across the train tracks, and up to the church with its graveyard and its yew tree. Connor took another bite of his cereal. His chewing was the only sound in the whole house. It had been a dream. What else could it have been? When he'd opened his eyes this morning, the first thing he'd looked at was his window. It had still been there, of course. No damage at all. No gaping hole in the yard. Of course it had. Only a baby would have thought it really happened. Only a baby would believe that a tree, seriously, a tree, had walked down the hill and attacked the house. He'd laughed a little at the thought, at how stupid it all was, and he stepped out of bed to the sound of a crunch beneath his feet. Every inch of his bedroom floor was covered in short, spiky yew tree leaves. See the giant's feet? He put another bite of cereal in his mouth, definitely not looking at the rubbish bin where he had stuffed the plastic bag full of leaves he'd swept up this morning, first thing. It had been a windy night. They'd clearly blown in through his open window, clearly. He finished his cereal and toast, drank the last of his juice, then rinsed the dishes and put them in the dishwasher. Still, 20 minutes to go. He decided to empty the rubbish bin altogether, less risky that way, and took the bag out to the wheelie bin in front of the house. Since he was already making the trip, he gathered up the recycling and put that out too. Then he got a load of sheets going in the washer that he'd hang out on the line when he got home from school. He went back to the kitchen and looked at the clock. Still 10 minutes left. Still no sign of Connor, he heard from the top of the stairs. He let out a long breath that he hadn't realized he was holding in. "You've had breakfast?" his mom asked, leaning against the kitchen door frame. "Yes, Mom," Connor said, rucksack in his hand. "You're sure?" "Yes, Mom." She looked at him doubtfully. Connor rolled his eyes. "Toast and cereal and juice," he said. "I put the dishes in the dishwasher." "And took the rubbish out," his mom said quietly, looking at how neat he'd left the kitchen. "There's washing going too," Connor said. "You're a good boy," she said, and though she was smiling, he could hear sadness in it too. "I'm sorry I wasn't up." "It's okay." "It's just this new round." "It's okay," Connor said. She stopped, but she still smiled back at him. She hadn't tied her scarf around her head yet this morning, and her bare scalp looked too soft, too fragile in the morning light, like a baby's. It made Connor's stomach hurt to see it. "Was that you I heard last night?" she asked. Connor froze. "When?" "Sometime after midnight must have been," she said, shuffling over to switch on the kettle. "I thought I was dreaming, but I could have sworn I heard your voice." "Probably just talking in my sleep," Connor said flatly. "Probably," his mom yawned. She took a mug off the rack hanging by the fridge. "I forgot to tell you," she said lightly. "Your grandma's coming by tomorrow." Connor's shoulders sank. "Oh, Mom." "I know," she said, "but you shouldn't have to make your own breakfast every morning." "Every morning?" Connor said. "How long is she going to be here?" "Connor, we don't need her here." "You know how I get at this point in the treatments, Connor. We've been okay so far." "Connor," his mom snapped, so harshly it seemed to surprise them both. There was a long silence, and then she smiled again, looking really, really tired. "I'll try to keep it as short as possible, okay?" she said. "I know you don't like giving up your room, and I'm sorry. I wouldn't have asked her if I didn't need her to come, all right?" Connor had to sleep on the settee every time his grandmother came to stay, but that wasn't it. He didn't like the way she talked to him, like he was an employee under evaluation. An evaluation he was going to fail. Plus, they had always managed so far, just the two of them, no matter how bad the treatments made her feel. It was the price she paid to get better, so why? "Only a couple of nights," his mom said, as if she could read his mind. "Don't worry, okay?" He picked at the zipper on his rucksack, not saying anything, trying to think of other things. And then he remembered the bag of leaves he'd stuffed into the rubbish bin. Maybe Grandma staying in his room wasn't the worst thing that could happen. "There's the smile I love," his mom said, reaching for the kettle as it clicked off. And then she said with mock horror, "She's going to bring me some of her old wigs, if you can believe it." She rubbed her bare head with her free hand. "I'll look like a zombie, Margaret Thatcher." "I'm going to be late," Connor said, eyeing the clock. "Okay, sweetheart," she said, teetering over to kiss him on the forehead. "You're a good boy," she said again. "I wish you didn't have to be quite so good." As he left to head off for school, he saw her take her tea over to the kitchen window above the sink. And when he opened the front door to leave, he heard her say, "There's that old yew tree," as if she was talking to herself. We'll stop there today, but we may go on with this. Hope you have a good week, and we'll see you next time.